This episode is going to be all about Team INEOS UK foils. What went so wrong at the America's Cup World Series in December, and what have they changed to improve the situation so dramatically for the Prada Cup. I've got Tom Partington with me, just on the line, Rob Gullan as always. We're going to have a little chat about what we're seeing, delving into the footage. So these always secretly really fast foils with just some teething issues, or are they now just making the best situation of what are effectively not great foils?
Very interesting question, and it's very difficult to answer. But my opinion at the moment is leading to your last comment. So the INEOS foils are, I think they're the largest lifting sections out of all the boats. And they have a plan form. So when you look at the plan view of the foil, it's called a delta section. So it's quite triangular.
So a Vulcan bomber is your typical delta shape.
Yeah, like a Concorde wing, like that kind of very triangular shape with some small sweep back on the tips. Now, this particular wing shape is really suited to very fast application. So we're talking supersonic flight, and so obviously the boats that never go supersonic, but there's a comparison because the fluid density of water is very different to that of air. You can compare a bomber plane speed to a sailing boat's plane speed using a figure called Reynolds numbers. And even when you start looking at the detail of this, I still can't quite work out as to why they've gone down the delta wing route.
Well, I think the delta route, Tom, is not necessarily an optimum hydrodynamic thing, but you do have the issue in these foils that you have to house actuators for the flaps. Now, the actuator is obviously a given length, and if that's housed in the foil route, you end up having to have a given cord length at the foil route. So I agree. I mean, you're being nice about this, but I agree with you. When you look at the Reynolds numbers associated with these boats, you're talking more in the area of high performance gliders than you are in the realms of supersonic jets.
Absolutely.
So from a hydrodynamic point of view, I don't think either of us really see why you'd be going away from high aspect ratio, short chord, elliptical load distribution, no sweep, and INEOS seem to not have quite a lot of those things.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, and the other thing, I suppose one of the other positives of this shape is that because you've got a long root cord, you may be able to have a slightly lower percentage thickness aerofoil shape, which has slightly less drag. And you should, due to the nature of the shape, be able to have pretty good flap control with a delta wing like this. But the cons, you end up with a low aspect ratio foil, which, as we've mentioned earlier, you want to be aiming for as higher aspect ratio as you can, especially during takeoff. So during takeoff, the induced drag, which is largely defined by aspect ratio, is about 50% of the total system drag. So when I say total system, I mean sail, hull form, but the whole lot. And that's a massive percentage. And so when you don't have a foil that's not particularly well suited to that application, it does make you understand as to why they were really struggling for takeoff in the World Series events.
This is a really interesting point, Tom, and it's maybe we should actually touch on why we think INEOS were struggling to take off so much in those World Series events. So a lot of the chat and commentary was about the fact they had water that was ingressing into the foils. And I think as a casual spectator, you might think, well, is that really such a huge problem? Yeah, maybe it's a little thing, but does that really matter? But actually, when you think about it, if there's a cavity in the foil that's, say, the size of a shoebox, when you're at your kitchen sink and you get a bowl and you place it on the surface and you push it under the water, it holds all that air inside the bowl. Then if you tip it a little bit, all that air escapes and rushes up to the surface. So if water's going in, that means air has to get out. And it seems that probably every time they're putting the foil down into the water, that air gets displaced and runs all over the surface of the flap. So just at the point where they're trying to get a load of lift to get the boat up and going again, the foil gets submerged in air, generates no lift, and the boat just falls straight back into the water. So
yeah, it's an incredibly good observation.
I mean, the analogy here would be, it would be like you're racing into the first bend at 100 miles an hour, and then suddenly your front wing, when you expect it to generate a lot of downforce, generates no downforce. Well, it doesn't matter if you're the best driver in the world. There's only one thing that's happening there. You're going straight on. And really, that is how catastrophic it was proving to be for INEOS. So on the face of it, it sounded like quite a small thing, but when you think about what the repercussion of that is, it was pretty significant.
Because we were seeing in the World Series, we were seeing decent speeds for INEOS. So obviously, comparable to the other teams, certainly. And actually, when it got light, what we were seeing is INEOS drop off the foils sooner in manoeuvres and lose speed in manoeuvres. That was really the key weakness. It wasn't necessarily getting up on the foils in the first place, although they did struggle quite a lot against Emirates on a really light day. But in the races they were getting round, but getting absolutely done over on, it was actually in the tacks. The tacks were really slow, and they were keeping the new foil down, the old foil down for quite a long time. And this, when you think about it, this all kind of makes a little bit more sense. If as you're putting the new foil into the water, it's not giving you the lift right away that you're expecting to get from it.
And worse than that, Tom, it might be giving you no lift over parts of the section.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's it's catastrophic. In that way. So I'm thinking about how they obviously made quite a big improvement in their light wind performance between the World Series and the Prada Cup. And there's one of the cons of this foil shape is that actually it requires a higher angle of attack and for you to use more flap at lower speeds. And this is something that they may have been able to go back into the shed and put some more range into their foil flap, or modify the angle of attack that it is for the light winds, and that could have seen them claw some of that performance that they didn't have in the World Series. I mean, I'm using, because they haven't changed the foil per se, but there was a marked different improvement in performance.
Yeah, that would make sense, Tom, because obviously when the boat is in the water in floating mode, you can't change the angle of attack of the foil using the rudder. The boat will trim to its waterline, so the only thing you can do to increase angle of attack on the whole foil is to take it off and reattach it with a bit more angle of attack.
Exactly, yeah.
Once you're flying, you can adjust that angle of attack by trimming the stern up or down using the rudder.
Yeah.
Shall I have a look at the pitch that INEOS are sailing around with in the World Series versus the Prada Cup?
If
they're sailing around with more pitch now, that would suggest more nose down pitch. That would suggest that they've increased the angle of attack, would it not?
Particularly downwind. Because
particularly downwind.
Upwind you can just change your cant. So upwind you could just upwind you would have the same angle of attack. Well, you'd have more angle of attack on the foil, but then you'd effectively reduce that by canting out a little bit more. So it would be quite hard to pick up on this. We'd have to look at boat pitch, cant angle, and probably know what the flap angle is. So it would be hard for us to tell us. They'll have changed it like less than a degree, so I'm not sure I would see anything.
Okay, the visual differences we can see is a slight lump on the bottom of the foil on the symmetry line underneath, right in the centre. So there's a small bump that has appeared over Christmas. And the other thing we can see, you won't see it in the World Series footage because they refaired it and painted it all black. But the other thing we can see is a couple of tabs midway along the flap on the underside. So if we're going to be really wild with our speculation and say they needed more flap range, could it be that this lump on the bottom and the tabs could be to allow the mechanics inside a little bit more space to extend their range? Wild speculation here, but
it's not a completely wild bit of speculation.
I think that tab on the bottom on the center, so it's level with the flap on the center plane, isn't it? Yeah. I think that means when you go full flap down, you still have foil vertical overlapped with the flap. So they won't want the flap to drop below the level of the vertical, because I think you'll start getting some very weird interactions then.
Yeah, you will. Yeah.
And just tell us about these little winglets, Tom.
So I'll cover off winglets and I've probably got to go. They basically decrease the pressure gradient at the tip of the lifting surface. So if you imagine you've got a high pressure on the bottom face and a low pressure on the top face, if you've got high and low pressure, flow will try and travel from the high pressure region to the low pressure region. So what a winglet does is it stops this flow kind of looping around the end of the wing and generating vortices off the tip.
So the winglet shape change that they brought in at INEOS was the winglet's kind of scalloped on its back edge a bit more now, and it's not quite such a 90-degree angle of the winglet going up. It's more of a curved
a bit more curved, yeah.
There are two factors here. One is that when you have two surfaces intersecting each other on a foil, if both of those have aerofoil shape, you end up with where you have the two thick sections butting up against each other, you get dramatic flow accelerations, which can lead to cavitations. So you see that at the root, and you also see it as a potential issue at the wing tip. But
Which
but
then,
also
then actually generates more drag.
Yeah, and also those winglets and the cutouts in them, they will be exclusively modelled to reduce induced drag from tip vortices. Which when you think about this logically, it's not really surprising that American Magic seem very fast, is it, when they're up and foiling and flying, because they've got Airbus as a sponsor.
Yeah, that's what they do.
Right, we'll leave it there with the INEOS design. I think we've covered all the really nitty-gritty changes. So I hope we've picked up on a few things that you might not have seen yourself. And hang tight because we get some more videos out there, the basics of the foil design, some generics about the shapes we're seeing, and the kind of design histories of each team, just to really take you beyond what you're hearing in the main footage. So cheers for that, take care, and enjoy the weekend's racing. I can't wait.